Joining us now to discuss all of that is Jennifer Grossman. She is former George H.W. Bush speechwriter, former senior vice president of the Dole Food Company, and current CEO of the Atlas Society. It's good to see you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria.
Can you share with us your experiences in working with the late president?
Well, I think back to my first meeting with him in the Oval Office, and I was so nervous. I just couldn't get out a word. I was stammering, and he smoothed over all awkward silences. He made small talk. He really had this innate sense of empathy, which I really think helped him to be a successful politician. At the same time, I don't think we should mistake that sense of empathy for a selflessness in the literal sense of the word. Bush was very ambitious. He wanted to win. He liked to compete. He wanted to succeed. He wanted to be number one. And like most successful people, he lived a life of achievement, of productivity, of hard work, of reason, and of ethical self-interest.
Jennifer, it's Kevin Kelly. What do you think was one of the most defining legacies from his 4 years in term? My favorite part of was when it was after he was president, was '85, and he went skydiving. But since you spent time in his administration, what do you think that one of the most defining things was?
Well, I think he did great things for free trade, having engineered the National American Free Trade Agreement. I think also a legacy is that you don't go back on your promises. I think Bush had a very healthy sense of ego, and when he let himself be unduly influenced by others, that's when he paid the price. And unfortunately, the prime example of that was having reneged on his pledge not to raise taxes.
Right, and the Democrats did not lower spending in the way that George Mitchell and the Democrats in Congress and in the Senate had promised the president. So he went against what he had promised the American people on that.
But also, I would say, in terms of one of his personal legacies, was his ability to heal his relationships. I think we were all very moved by the scene of Bob Dole struggling to stand up from his wheelchair.
That was very emotional.
To honor the president. But you got to think back that they did not always have an easy time of it in terms of their relationship. You think back to that botched Nashua presidential debate when Dole called him a Nazi. So Bush was able to heal, to inspire respect. You think of the successful relationship that he had with even President Clinton after their extremely divisive presidential campaign, and the relationship that he forged with Reagan after their divisive campaign. So I think that's something that we can all take away. Funerals are a time for healing. They're a time for healing in our families when we reach out to estranged relatives. This can be a time of healing for the nation as well.
Yeah.
I just want to quote to your point about his relationship with President Clinton after he left office. I always go back to that January 20th, 1993 letter that President George H.W. Bush wrote to incoming President Clinton.
That's a beautiful letter.
And he ends it with, "Your success now is our country's success. I am rooting hard for you. Good luck." That's what's lost in this nation right now.
Yeah.
That's what's lost.
Elegance.
Hey, Jennifer, Bob Nardelli here. I think one of the toughest things would be for George W. Bush, his son, to give this eulogy today. Any thoughts about how he will address it? Have you provided any insight or comments to him, memorable moments to, try to make it a more doable delivery?
Well, that's a really good question, because from a purely speechwriting point of view, I think presidents are influenced, particularly if they have been a vice president. There's a little bit of a vice president syndrome, and President Bush was no exception. I think he chafed a little bit at having to play that role. And when President H.W. Bush assumed office, he downgraded the role of speechwriting and giving speeches. He saw it as almost sort of a vanity or an indulgence. And so as a result, he never really bonded with his speechwriters, and you saw the result. He was never known for the vision thing. His son, President George W. Bush, learned that there's a price to be paid for things going wrong on a staff level. And so he went the opposite direction. He made a priority to interview each of his speechwriters, to spend time with them. And those that he didn't spend time with, they didn't work out so well. So I'm pretty confident. I think George Bush and George H.W. Bush had excellent speechwriting teams, but George W. Bush really managed to form that symbiotic relationship with his speechwriters that allowed them to envision him as his best self and help support him in writing for that context.
Your thoughts on the other eulogies today? Alan Simpson among them, John Meacham, as well as Brian Mulroney.
John Meacham. Yeah, Power and Destiny. That was such a spectacular book, and I would recommend it to anyone who would like to really get a full biography of President Bush. But again, you know, even John Meacham, he was asking the president at what time, well, how would you, sum up what drove you to become president? And President Bush said, he thought about it for hours, and he said, I want to win, that desire to succeed. So, even though he liked to present himself, and I think we should remember the positive aspects of humility, or at least lack of arrogance, we shouldn't forget that this was somebody who was driven from the beginning to achieve, to accomplish things. And this is clearly a legacy he's passed on to his children.
Yes. Jennifer, thanks very much for your insights. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer Grossman there.